when I interact with even universities, teachers, students, and outside also, there is a general kind of feeling, and a lot of people also keep saying, oh, ये तो होते रहते हैं, हमारे साथ क्या है? हमारा तो जैसे चल रहा है जैसे चल रहेगा. मतलब means, when I spoke it in Hindi, that's why more of the community groups I speak with, that whatever happens in the global level, that is immaterial to us. In our situation, whatever was running is running. It doesn't really is impacted by the international policies or trends and directions. So I'm trying to show not exhaustive list, but some of the areas connected with larger climate action, directly or indirectly connected with decarbonization, but directly with climate action of a variety of types. Many of you might know that India brought up, not only India brought out its National Action Plan on Climate Change, NAPCC, in 2008 June. And a lot of people at that time also said, oh, Indian government has come up with this, it's a big good thought. As if it came up, India became a member of the UNFCCC right in 1993, it member, but Action Plan on Climate Change came up in 2008. Why it took 10 years? 10 years nahi, this is 8 plus 8, almost 15 years. So the international pressure or international trend setting, the direction came not starting from Bali, the COP13, the Conference of Parties number 13 in 2007, but the Bali was the highlight where lot of these were categorized, given to nations as action point. Given means it's voluntary, but nations who are ratifying this or agreeing to this agreement, they come up with this. And this is the Bali Action Plan points into 5 categories: shared vision, mitigation, adaptation, technology, and financing. The last 4 are called at that point of time, called the 4 pillars of climate action. And it's not only in India, neighboring Bangladesh, several other countries, they came up with their national action plans on climate change. Of course, the Bangladesh one was much better than our one in original plans at the same point of time. So even a national plan to tackle climate change, and South Asia being one of the most vulnerable, identified as one of the most vulnerable along with Sub-Saharan Africa, this delay clearly shows what is the direction, what is the impulse, what are the forces that are driving. And out of that, in the National Action Plan, after the National Action Plan, which is nothing but a 49-page wishful statement, nothing, no action plan, no timeline was there in the NAPCC. But when a lot of us criticized, the government of India said, no, this is just the beginning. We are coming up with the missions and then the state action plans on climate change, which will be the operative part. At the national level, the missions will be there, and the state level, the state action plan, the sub-CCs will be the operative part. And they came up with several missions for adaptation, national missions, water mission, sustainable habitat, sustainable agriculture, sustaining the Himalayan ecosystem, and several missions for mitigation. Along the same lines, I'll also talk about how they responded to the possibility of getting climate finance. That is also connected. That came through two angles. One is through the Bali Action Plan, Bali Roadmap, and then Bali Action Plan. But the other is another discussion that was going on in the UN for much longer. That's RED and RED+. I'll explain that a little later. So all these action plans, which are now, even now, the guiding documents in the Indian national scenario for climate action. At the national level, these are the guiding documents, along with which came much later in 2015, the NDC. And that is connected. Another area which probably we don't see as decarbonization or climate action, we see as taking care of the ozone depletion, not the whole ozone depletion. But we also forget that CFCs and HCFCs are very strong, very powerful greenhouse gases. So eliminating CFCs and HCFCs has a very direct and very large impact on global warming. So Montreal Protocol, taken in 87, India ratified it, I think, 92, and then immediately afterwards, whole set of policies, plans, etc. came in the Indian domain to tackle the ODS, the ozone depleting substances problem. Of course, the developing countries were given much longer time to act on that, but immediately after this, India 1992, India agreed to signed on the Montreal Protocol, 87 Protocol, and immediately afterwards, all these sets, I'm not going into details of this will be available with CFM. What I was talking about in the financing, because early in the climate conventions, this has changed drastically over the last 7-8 years in the UNFCCC forum. It has changed drastically. I have been following the UNFCCC forum for the last 14 years quite closely. Not only the COPs, but also the intersessionals, where lot more intense discussions, detailed discussion take place. And most of this takes place in Bonn, being the secretariat of UNFCCC. So I've been taking part in many of these intersessionals also. And what we have seen is that at one point of time, India, along with many other poorer developing countries, were out in the market of climate finance. They were actively seeking climate finance. And one of the routes that many of the countries, along with India, sought is the RED. RED is reducing emission through deforestation and forest degradation. The original proposal was RED. So the countries which have a declared or which are known high deforestation rate could ask for climate finance. But Indian government just before that announced publicly, we have no net deforestation. So how do you ask for money that is being given for reducing deforestation? So it was largely India's initiative to introduce the plus. What is plus? They said it's not only deforestation, but forest carbon intensification. So the proposal was, since we have already declared there is no net deforestation, we will intensify our carbon stock in the existing forest areas, because as you know, large part, 40% of Indian forest land has around 10% ground density. So it's completely degraded forest. But unfortunately, those are the same areas where many of the Indian communities, which are forest dependent communities, forest produce dependent communities, are dependent on. And there is a very big conflict. I might just flag that in the end. That's an important thing to consider while you consider the larger society, rather than just the policies and rules and plans and actions. So to gain benefit of the climate financing through the RED route, we added the plus. A lot of countries agreed on that, and the RED plus, next year Indian government launched a RED readiness program, which was called RED readiness, which was not called RED plus readiness program, but which was basically for taking, and what is RED? Countries which have high deforestation or proposed through RED plus, who will add more carbon stock to their forest, will get funding from rich countries, developed countries, that is the Annex 1 countries, basically. Because this is supposed to sequester carbon dioxide. So this was another route, the third pillar, climate finance. This is the details of that. I'm not going into details. And if you see, almost all of this follows 1 year before. There is an international UN fora or some fora. 1 year before, there is a policy push, there is a decision taken or agreement reached in the UNFCCC forum. And next year or the year after that, there is an Indian policy which comes into that forum, that particular arena. So saying that all this happens in the international forums and it doesn't really affect us is not really true. Lot of things that are happening here are being influenced from outside, right from our original climate action policy plan. See, the Green India mission, that's another route, or the National Mission for Green India, whatever you call it. Its full name is National Mission for a Green India. We call it Green India Mission in short. So that is also, that came in 2014. If you look at it, in the Warsaw COP, this whole issue of RED Plus was also adopted in 2013 in the Warsaw COP. And in 2014, the National Mission for Green India was launched. What is that? India will re-densify its forests, have more carbon stock. Apparently, because the objective that was stated here is to India should reclaim its forest, to strengthen its forest. Actually, immediately after that, several state forest departments entered into agreement with different international agencies for both voluntary carbon market and compliance market. At that point, RED, as of now also, RED or RED Plus is not part of compliance market, which is likely to become, but voluntary market you can buy and give carbon credit through voluntary market for RED Plus projects. And the first RED Plus project happened immediately after that in Meghalaya. We have visited that, we have done study on that in Maflong. And as I was mentioning yesterday, it's complete secrecy. Who got the money, where that money flowed, which community members got it. It's very highly advertised globally because this was the first project, first RED Plus project in South Asia. RED Plus projects happened earlier in Kenya and other countries in Africa. But in South Asia, probably Maflong was the first in Meghalaya, East Khasi Hills. It was the first RED Plus project. So this is not disconnected. The international policy, the national plan, the action plan, the mission, and then projects flowing. In Meghalaya, 400 square kilometer of dense good forest went under RED Plus project without people knowing. Then comes the more hyped Paris COP21, 2015, with all these NDC document which started with a Sanskrit sloka and which says, very surprisingly, like the earlier session, one speaker said coal is not brown. So that kind of very, very funny statements were there in the Indian NDC. They said coal is our primary energy source. Coal will remain our primary energy source for indefinite time to come. Will not agree to, that's the Indian NDC very clearly. Will not agree to any timeline. When will it reach peak emission? Will not agree to any peak emission level. What will be our peak emission level? But this is our NDC. And that NDC basically had three pledges. One is on energy efficiency. One is the installed capacity, percentage installed capacity of renewables or not renewables, non-carbon or non-fossil energy sources. So that pledge includes nuclear, includes big hydro. At that point of time, big hydro was non-renewable. It was changed later and there is a reason for that also. So, and the third was sequestering an additional 2.5 to 3 gigatons of carbon dioxide through forests, additional afforestation, reduced deforestation, densification, etc., etc. And then immediately afterwards, if you look at it, or simultaneously almost, it was planned. One is the International Solar Alliance. It was launched on 30th November 2015. At the time the Paris COP started, this was planned together with India's NDC. So it's very well connected. International Solar Alliance didn't happen in a vacuum, in isolation. It happened because India's plan was this, which was supposed to be immediately submitted. India, very significantly, India submitted the plan on 2nd October, Mahatma Gandhi's birthday, saying that it shows our, okay, how many? 5. Okay, good, good. So then immediately afterwards, after the Paris NDC, the first NDC, when India submitted it, you see the huge policy force for solar and wind, the renewable energies, launching International Solar Alliance jointly with France, because both the French President and Indian Prime Minister launched it. And also, as I said, not at the stroke of a pen, but at the click of a mouse, a whole bunch of non-renewable energy projects was converted into renewable energy projects. Because India at that time gave a pledge that by 2030, 40% of our installed power capacity, and remind this, or just notice this, this was not generation, this is installed capacity. Because renewables generally have a very low plant load factor compared with coal or nuclear or even big hydro. So it was percentage of installed power capacity, 40% will come from non-fossil sources. That means all kinds of renewables, solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, waste to energy, plus nuclear, plus big hydro, all this. And almost overnight, a few years later, 3 years later, big hydro, 25 megawatt and bigger, it was converted to renewable. Why? Because India also gave it, as I said, the target was upgraded from 40% to 50%. India said 50%, it's not 40. So we are now giving more. 50% of our installed power capacity by 2030 will be from non-fossil sources. So how do you jump 10%? One of the ways is 45 gigawatt of installed ready power, you convert from non-renewable to renewable. So that was another very clear set, and this is probably my last slide. Sorry that last part is probably not visible clearly. These two COPs, this is the most recent, Glasgow COP26 and recently in Dubai COP28. The official, the first time in 28 years, 28 years of official UNFCCC climate conference of parties negotiation. This is the first time in COP26 in Glasgow, 2 years ago. Now it is almost 2 months ago. The word fossil fuel or the word coal came into the text because several countries demanded coal, being the most intensive, carbon intensive, most CO2 emission intensive fossil fuel, be phased out first. And I think justifiably India, China resisted that because there was no mention of oil, which actually is mainstay of US, EU economies. It is becoming the mainstay of their economy, oil and gas. They are depending less and less on coal. Their economies have depended more and more on oil and gas. So those were not referred to at all. So in a sense, justifiably, India, China, they strongly oppose this. But the word that coal phase out was completely unacceptable to many countries, including India, China, Indonesia, and others. So what was included is a very vague, watered down language. Coal phase down of unabated coal. It's a very, if you don't know unabated is where the emitted carbon dioxide is not sequestered back. There is no proven viable technology in the world as of today of carbon sequestration and storage or carbon sequestration use and storage or DAC, direct air capture. These are all, there are whatever technologies have been demonstrated which has a reasonable time span of sequestration, 30 years plus, is very, very expensive. And it's very geomorphology specific and has other kind of CCS, carbon capture and storage, has high risk involved. If anybody wants to know, just search Lake Nyos disaster, which happened in Cameroon in 1967 or 68. 1,000 plus, I think 1,800 people died because the compressed carbon air, naturally compressed carbon dioxide storage under a lake leaked out in the night, and people sleeping just silently died, and thousands of cattle died. So we can't imagine a situation where tens of thousands of such huge million tons carbon dioxide will be stored underground under high pressure, and which community is going to accept that? Anyway, those are questions many of the people who are talking here in the panels, carbon capture and storage without understanding what it involves, are not really answering, not really trying to understand. So even that short, in the textual in the text, the description that or the text of coal phase out was rejected. So phase down, how much? No mention. By which date? No mention. Phase down of unabated coal. So even if coal is quote unquote abated, then it need not be even phased down. So need not be reduced even. So that was Glasgow COP26. Latest, a few months ago, in Dubai, COP28, after a lot of battles, in fact in Dubai for the first time in the COP28, 134 countries stood very strongly for a language and for a commitment for fossil fuel phase out. Not coal, entire fossil fuel phase out. 134 countries. You know, the 197 countries, they are parties to the UNFCCC. They are members of the UNFCCC convention. And I think 2 or 3 less are parties to the Paris Agreement. So there are 2 conferences which run parallelly. One is the convention, one is the members of the agreement, CMA. So 134, in spite of 134 countries pressurizing, raising demand, in that the IOCs, 45 island countries which are facing submergence, they also raised very strongly, but this language was not accepted. That fossil fuel phase out was not accepted. The only after 2 days of very contentious discussion, what was accepted is, which a lot of people said it's a progress. The language is, I'm quoting exactly, transitioning, the necessity of transitioning away from fossil fuel. So just think about it. Phase out fossil fuels is a very direct, action-oriented phrase. But transitioning away from fossil fuels. So that was the language which is officially accepted in the text now, which has been accepted in Dubai. But many people, as I'm saying, many people are happy that at least in 28 years, we have directly talked about fossil fuels need to go out in the official text. So whatever we are saying, that international, and immediately afterwards, let me connect this and then come to conclusion. Immediately afterwards, you see Indian government, and this has been going on from COP26, as I said, Indian government rejigs its policies. Last several years, it was playing down the coal power. If you have noticed, last several years it was playing down coal power and playing up the renewable energies. But over the last few months, it had started playing up the coal power again, placing coal power again on a higher pedestal. So connections are very clear. What happens in the international arena, how that dominates or directs state policy, both in the positive sense, like positive policies came as a result of this, and what you don't want to do is, if you have language and if you have a direction in the international agreement for a fossil fuel phase out or even a coal phase out, then you have to do something. So India, China, Indonesia, of course Saudi Arabia led OPEC, they vehemently opposed the language of fossil fuel phase out. They said we will not accept any text which mentions that in this year. So ultimately this was the agreement which do not actually demand fossil fuel phase out. But how do you reduce carbon emission without phasing out fossil fuel? That's a magic. PC Sarkar might be able to solve it. Leaders will not be able to solve it. Thank you.